This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and iZotope. You're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone in a Carl Tatz designed room through the Spectra 1964 STX 600 mic pre-complimenter and iZotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
A lot of times the bathrooms get used for, guitar amps. I use them for guitar amps a lot. The guitar amp will fill up the bathroom and you'll get those short reflections, but it's not overwhelming because the guitar amp's so loud. So it does give it like a little bit of different feel. I did a record with Two Bob Crew. So that album, TK2, I did all of the Cora happened in the tiled shower in the API room.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. I used to have an expensive pop filter for my vocal mic that was so fragile, I had to put a sign on it warning singers not to touch it or else the thing would break. But not anymore. Now I've got this super durable pop filter from jzmic.com that sounds fantastic. I don't have to worry about stuff breaking and can focus on making music. Go ahead, grab my pop filter. I dare you. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS and get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Howdy, Rockstar. Are you ready to discover the secrets to making your mixes sound professional no matter what your studio situation? Then check out my free mixing course, Mixmasterbundle.com, where I show you how to get pro-sounding mixes in your DAW using simple techniques and free plugins. And when you're ready for more advanced studio skills, then check out Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can learn from Grammy-winning teachers to help you record, edit, mix, and master your best record ever. Use the code ROCKSTAR for 10% off for a limited time. No matter where you like to rock in the galaxy, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron lets you record with confidence over USB-C with up to more than a gigabyte per second of real-world performance. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the Envoy Pro Electron and all your OWC storage needs at maxsales.com/rockstars. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Julian Dreyer, who grew up in a small artist community in the mountains of Western North Carolina, and after a 3-year stint as a sound engineer at a large music venue in Asheville, North Carolina, he became the staff engineer at the newly built Echo Mountain Recording. He's worked there for the last 15 years and has been chief engineer for the last 8 years. In 2017, he won a Grammy with Secret Agent 23 Skidoo for engineering and mixing the best children's album. Cool, man. He's worked on hundreds of albums in every capacity, from assisting to engineering and mixing to producing, or all of these things at once. Since working at Echo Mountain, he's worked on albums with the Avett Brothers, Steve Martin, Jerry Douglas, the Steep Canyon Rangers, Mandolin Orange, Band of Horses, Zac Brown, Jim Lauderdale and Rising Appalachia, to name just a few. And of course, we've included a playlist of Julian's work in the show notes. So just click through there if you want to listen to a bunch of these great sounding records too. He also regularly engineers the PBS television show Echo Sessions, which is shot at Echo Mountain Recording. A big thank you also to the manager of the studio, Jessica Thomason, for making our introduction. Thank you, Jessica. You rock. Please welcome Julian Dreyer to Recording Studio Rockstars. Julian, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm ready.
Welcome, man. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Boy, two things. One, Asheville is such a cool place, and two, Echo Mountain recording is such a cool place. So that's very cool that you're there, man. Give us a little bit of a brief introduction to who you are and how you got into music and ended up in such an awesome studio.
Well, I grew up in a small little town that's like about an hour sort of northeast of Asheville, right near Mount Mitchell. So like from my grandparents' yard, I could see the tower on top of Mount Mitchell. So we're sort of like in the shadow of those mountains, which
is that near Marshall?
It's past Marshall. Like you kind of go past Marshall and keep going. Cause it's up around a little farther out in the sticks.
Okay, cool.
But the place that I grew up in is actually, the interesting part about it is that I refer to it as a Marxist planned community, but it's not. It's Quaker, but it's a land trust. So it is this weird like pseudo communist kind of like pocket of people that it has attracted a bunch of artists like glassblowers and potters and visual artists of a bunch of types, because it's real close to the Penland School of Crafts, which is like a national craft school. And both my grandmother and my dad worked as staff there. My dad's still there. He's the communications director of Penland. So I kind of grew up in and around this very active artist community. And so I'm only an hour from Asheville, so we would go into Asheville all the time, and I was very familiar with it. And when I was in high school, I was doing the thing where you're like playing in bands and like all the other stuff. And like everybody got a 4-track tape recorder and pretty quickly realized that I was much more into recording stuff than playing bass.
Right.
Which, I still like playing bass, but like that sort of lit me up a lot quicker. So that was kind of like, I did 2 gap years between high school and college, which I know some parents are not into, but I would strongly recommend it because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing.
Right.
So like instead of blowing a bunch of money on college, not knowing what the hell I was doing, I sort of worked a succession of shitty jobs and realized I really did need to go to college.
So you did a year of shitty jobs and then were like, this is so great, I'm going to do another year of shitty jobs.
Right, exactly. I mean, one of the things I did is I went to Japan and hung out with a friend of mine for a little while, which was cool, a totally weird, eye-opening, perspective-shifting experience because it's literally on the other side of the planet and it feels that way, So... But yeah, so I doubled down on the gap year, and then I went to UNCA in Asheville. So that's when I really sort of moved into Asheville in earnest. And they have a small recording program which I blasted through, and it was cool because it was small, so there was lots of like personal attention from the professors. But people ask me all the time, should I go to school for this? And I'm like, well, if you can go to a school where you have access to a studio 24/7, then you should, because that's what you use it for. It's cool to know background written work stuff about gear and whatnot, but you don't really learn what it is or how to use it until you're just grinding in there, doing it wrong a bunch of times, And so I spent a lot of time in the college studio, just trying to figure out how that stuff worked. And then in my senior year, I got an internship at the Orange Peel, which is sort of the largest music venue in Asheville. And so I spent 3 or 4 years there kind of learning how to do things the quick and dirty way, which I feel like has benefited me a lot later on because there's some certain things that I just don't prioritize when I'm in the studio. Like, that's good enough. Let's move on,
Yeah.
And some things that I'm like, no, let's really spend time to dial this in because this is going to be important. But like, do I hear the hi-hat, Mike? Yes, I hear it. I'll worry about that later. That a lot of that comes from like having to open the doors at 8:00. And so most of the sound check is like, do we hear stuff? Yes, we hear stuff. We'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And And also just like being a monitor engineer really teaches you what frequency you're hearing, because you have to find the feedback rings. And so as soon as you hear that, you're like, oh, well, that's 1.6K, because you've heard it so many times that you know it. And that helps when you're having a problem with the tone of something. So you can identify like which part of the frequency range is
Plus, you probably had a graphic EQ, which really helped you see which was which.
Yeah, and it helps you really understand, like if you're running monitors for mostly just vocals, like where the important parts of the voice are. You know,
right. That is something that you share in common with Vance Powell, of course, who really swears by starting out as live, as a live engineer, a live music engineer.
I would totally agree with him. I think the only caveat to that is if you're going to do it that way, really, really be careful about protecting your hearing.
Yeah.
I was definitely like very consciously aware of it. I had a Q wedge down next to me that was like kind of off to one side, so it would kind of blast out one ear.
Yeah.
And I would switch it once a month for a month. I
don't know if anybody's ever really figured out a good solution for that. I suppose in-ears could be helpful.
If your whole band's in-ear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you're running a whole in-ear rig, then in-ears is probably better because then you have a much better. I mean, the point of the Q wedge is for you to hear what they're hearing.
It's such a tricky thing too. And it's worth talking about rock stars. Just, if you're young, then I promise you, if you're anything like me, you just revel in volume, and you are like, that feeling of going up in front of the main speakers at a show and getting lost in that sound. It's a really exciting feeling the first time you discover it. But the problem is we're just not built to be able to do that without losing something every time.
Yeah. And unless you're really conscious and aware of it, like you don't realize how much damage you've done until you walk out of the venue. And then you're like, oh, I can't hear anything at normal levels right now.
Yeah. Or you think it's funny that your ears are ringing. You're like, oh, my ears are ringing.
Yeah. So I definitely remember when I first started working at Echo Mountain, we had a tech in that was doing some testing on gear. And I was kind of like, will you just play 17 kilohertz through the speakers? Just so I just want to see if I can still hear it, because I spent so long in there and I could still hear it. So I was like, okay, all right. I did all of the like taking earplugs in and out and like swapping the position of my Q wedge and just like being extra vigilant about it actually paid off. So that would be my add-on to Vance Powell's excellent advice of starting in live sound is like, yes, start in live sound, but be careful.
Yeah, because when you're the engineer, I remember mixing live sound at a point where I was already wanted to wear earplugs. And I was like, sure, I'll make time for this. There's no way I'm going to do it without some foam earplugs in my ears while I'm doing it, And somebody later kind of chewed me out for that. I was like, yeah, sorry. But I mean, at this point in my life, I fondly reminisce about, what 12K used to sound like. So I know what you're talking about. And it's natural for us to lose high end too as we get older.
Totally. I did a check 2 weeks ago with my friend Derek, and we could both hear 15 real strong.
Wow. Nicely done, dude.
And barely 16 at all. So there's definitely like, I know now, like that's where it starts sloping off, is right in between 15 and 16.
Well, that's impressive. I had a roommate back when I had a tube television years ago, and my daughter and I'd be sitting around watching a movie, and he came down the stairs from, he was renting upstairs, and he was like, oh my God, don't you hear that? And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, oh,
because what is that, about 12 or something?
No, it's like 15.
Is it 15?
Yeah, because the old, CRT televisions, they have a scan rate that's up there in that high frequency. And so you can hear it. Sometimes it gets really loud. And sure enough, I pulled out my iPhone, a little real-time analyzer, and it showed right up on the mic. And I was like, wow, I had no idea there was a spike going on.
Yeah.
Fortunately, now we got flat screens, right?
I got one of those little analyzers for my phone too, because my wife is a ceramics artist, and when she runs the gas kiln outside, the whole house fills up with this tone that is literally just the gas rushing through the piping outside.
Wow. What's
because
the frequency?
She's pushing, it's 1.6. So it's right in the middle of, like, kind of talking frequencies.
Right,
It's kind of this like whistle that's just going throughout the house. But I downloaded the analyzer so I could figure out what it was, because I was like, I know the range that's in, but I'm curious exactly what it is.
I'll tell you, if you stop hearing that one, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it's definitely it's curtains.
It's curtains. Very cool. All right. So you're doing the live thing. And then what was your, how did this opportunity come up to be at Echo Mountain? Because I remember when it started, and I got invited to come out and see the place with some friends from Nashville. And it was just super fun. And I can't remember. I think I've been back once before after that. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful spot.
Yeah. I kind of had I knew that I wanted to work in a studio, and that live sound was like a stepping stone temporary thing. Because I got like an offer from the Derek Trucks band to run monitors for them, but my ex-wife, or my wife at the time, was pregnant, and so I didn't want to go on the road, because I'd worked at the Orange Field long enough to see what that does to marriages and families and stuff. It's pretty brutal. So I turned a couple of those opportunities down, and really was thinking like, I guess I'm going to have to move somewhere to really get into the studio thing. And so, but then a friend of mine was like, hey, I heard somebody's building a studio in a church downtown. You should check it out. So I kind of just showed up and like poked my head in, was like, hey, what are you guys doing? My name is Julian. I work at the Orange Peel. I'm an engineer in town, but I really want to work in a studio. And Steve, the studio owner, who loves construction projects, that's like his passion, is building stuff, was there. He was really hands-on in that part of it. And he was like, seemed really cool. And so I would go back every couple of weeks and just like check in on the progress. But the kicker was that Jessica was bartending at the Orange Peel at the same time. And so once she got the job as his PA and the studio manager, then I just started hitting her up. And I was like, okay, you're on the inside, make this happen for me. Because we had become pretty good friends working at the Orange Peel together. And it was kind of a win-win for both of us, because she, in a way, had already vetted my like work ethic and engineering skills by watching me, work at the Orange Peel. So, so that was like in the spring of 2006. So by October, they had hired me, and over the summer they actually had me come in and just kind of shadow Danny Kadar, who was the chief engineer at the time. And watch him run sessions and kind of learn the patch bay and, familiarize myself with that situation, so that in October they could just drop me in as an assistant and I would know what I was doing.
That's great. So what were some of the first responsibilities you had there at the studio?
So the funniest first responsibility that I can remember is, we have all these tube mics, and Steve had just bought like a bunch of stuff all at once. So they were all just kind of like sitting on shelves in the mic locker, coils of cables, this big thick like tube mic cables, and just kind of after sessions were kind of like, it looked like something, this seems real easy to screw up. Like none of this is protected. Like these are like $10,000 mics. Like, so the first thing that Steve had me do when they brought me on was, he was like, okay, I want you to organize the mic locker, but also, figure out some way of dealing with all these mics and all these like mic cables and stuff. So the first thing that I did is I looked at all the mic cables and I'm like, well, these are like, there's got to be some kind of garage thing for this. So I just went to Lowe's, and there's this whole like system of, things that you put up on the wall that have little rails in them. And then all these attachments you can buy from that are all made for like, garden equipment.
Right.
But they work great for like coils of wires too. So I just started I made one whole room like this sort of like cable room that had essentially like garage tool hanging equipment in it, but now had cables all over it. And then the next thing was like, figure out how to protect all these mics. And so I just bought like 1 million Pelican cases, because I was like, they all have the foam you can rip out. You can make them form-fitting so that they're like a mic box that a mic company might sell you with a mic where they fit exactly what you need it to fit.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also waterproof and fireproof. So that gave me a little like peace of mind. And,
that's smart.
And then
so if you store the mics in these Pelican cases, were they easy enough to get out for sessions, or is it, maybe a little bit of planning, but just the ability to know that they're safe if the worst happened?
No, it's totally fine because they're just like briefcases essentially. Because I would get, Pelican has like 50 different sizes of Pelican cases. So I had this little like template kind of the different sizes that I thought were going to be the most useful taped out on the floor. And I would just arrange the like power supply and cables and microphone within this little like floor template of a Pelican box so that it was the most efficient possible. And then order those boxes. So when you're setting up for a session, you're just grabbing these like basically suitcases that have these microphones inside of them. So I actually like it way better than having to like kind of carry multiple pieces. You just grab the box and take it to where you're going to set up the mic and pop it open and pull things out. And, it made it pretty, it made it easy and actually more efficient.
Yeah. Well, you're, of course, I guess we should describe the studio, but you're more in a multi-studio situation where maybe you have to share mics between studios, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of gear that goes back and forth between the buildings,
yeah.
So that helps too, especially if it's like raining outside, Yeah,
and that's always going to be a little bit different from the single room home studio environment where it's like, that mic is, you in a home studio, you might be able to just leave the mic on the stand and put a cover over it or something like that.
Right.
Different scenario. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at Spectra1964.com. With so many fantastic iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all the iZotope plugins through their new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Okay, so describe Echo Mountain recording to us, because I remember a beautiful church studio. I remember what was it, the Salvation Army room or something like that? Is that right?
Yeah. So we started with he started with just the church, and the church was it took him 2 years to get it all set up, but a year of that was like permitting and boring paperwork stuff. But the sanctuary is essentially the main live recording room, and then where the preacher and the choir is where he built in the control room. But just did and if you look at the pictures on the website, it's really impossible to tell what's original wainscoting and what was added. So the carpenters just did an amazing job making it look like it had always been that way, which is cool, because you walk in there and you're like, oh, it's a church studio. It's got a giant stained glass window, and it looks like it used to be a church, but it really seems like it's always been a studio, which I think is pretty cool. And then there's a couple ISO rooms off to the side, which I guess used to be classrooms or something. And then a kind of a vocal booth off to the side of the control room. And then just a giant, awesome lounge downstairs. I mean, one of the things that makes the church studio so great is it's the full kitchen and lounge just adds to the whole thing. So you really can just kind of move in,
Yeah.
And there's Zac Brown brought his his chef, and his chef was just cooking downstairs all day. And
what a good idea.
oh, it was a great idea. And because then it's like, the other thing that I find that does to a session too is like, if dinner happens at 6, then you just stop and go eat dinner.
Now,
as opposed to like,
was that Rebecca Wood? Because I know she did that later at Southern Ground Studios.
No, Zac's got his chef travels with the band. He has his own bus.
Oh, cool.
So they've got like the band bus and the chef bus. And the chef's got a sous chef. And like, I think Zac's dad was a professional chef, so he takes the whole thing really seriously. And he's done all that. He has all these things too, where like he sells limited numbers of tickets to his show that include hanging out and eating food with the band before the show.
Oh, that's great.
Because he has this whole philosophy about like breaking bread with people and like what an important thing that is. So,
well, it's a great way to keep a touring band engaged too, right?
But speaking of Rebecca, I would love to offer her in some sort of package deal where she would come to Asheville and cook and even just hang out. Like she's one of the like best studio mamas I've ever met.
Yeah, indeed.
I mean, she crushes it, you know.
So Rockstars, to let you know who that is, we're talking about Rebecca Wood is married to Oliver Wood of the Wood Brothers. Just some of the most talented people I've ever worked with. Very, very cool. So yeah. I don't think I've had a chance to. No, I probably have tried her cooking when I was over at Southern Ground for an event or something like that.
I've had it at Southern Ground a couple times, and always at the golf tournament, because she's always doing something wacky at the golf tournament. So.
The AES, is that the AES golf tournament?
Yeah, the AES golf tournament.
Yeah. So yeah, Rockstars, you gotta live in Nashville. What can I say? Nashville or take the N off Asheville. You know, one of the two.
Yeah, or my wife calls Asheville Nashville without the N.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, we digress, but I do think the takeaway there is reminding us how important it is to take the rest of life seriously to enhance the recording experience. You know, whether it's eating, whether it's taking the right kind of breaks, whether it's making sure everybody's sleeping comfortably. And, you know, you guys do a great job with that at Echo Mountain. So tell us more about the studio.
Okay. So for the first, I guess it was like 3 years, it was just the church, and they were still doing that. The other building was still being used for dance lessons. It was a dance studio.
Nice.
And but we shared the same parking lot, and so there was constantly like parking lot diff where people were arguing over like who was allowed to park there, and like
I've seen dance moms.
Yeah, right. So Steve, I think he bought that whole building, but I think the point of it was just to control the parking lot.
Nice.
You know. And then once he had the building, he was like, well, I could lease the building. And while he was trying to make that decision, Jakir King was in doing a record with this band called the Parlor Mob. And so it was one of the first few second or third booking that we had that was like 6 weeks long. So we were turning away all this other work because the building was locked out for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And it was right at that time when Steve had bought that other building. So he was just kind of like, well, let's build another studio.
Nice.
Which is amazing. So that building is 3 floors, and the top floor is all offices and a conference room. And that's where Jessica lives now. It's her like command center up there.
Cool.
And we rent out the other rooms upstairs to other people, which is like IMAVL is out of there, who does the Echo Sessions thing on PBS. And then there's someone else is renting another office. And then Ben Lovett does all his soundtracks from up there. He's got a composing room with all these crazy instruments, and he's doing movie soundtracks like 24/7. Like he's literally there 24 hours a day, it seems like. When I get there, his car's there. When I leave, it's still there.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a total workaholic. And then the other upstairs room has we just welcomed Duncan Trussell into our Echo Mountain family. So he's doing his podcast from the top floor of the API building.
Oh, cool. What do we know? Want to give a shout out to his podcast?
Yeah, it's the Duncan Trussell Family Hour, and so he's he's a comedian, but he's also really into like weird existential metaphysical like yoga kind of like Eastern religion stuff. So a lot of his podcast has to do with that. But he's also hilarious because he's a comedian. So it's great. We have like this sort of like little ecosystem of different businesses that are all kind of friendly to each other. So anyways, the studio itself, the middle floor is basically just a giant open room. It used to be the actual like performance part area from the dance studio. So there's like it's big room with a wooden floor and then a stage.
Yeah.
And then Steve treated it so it has all these clouds on it, all these sound absorptive clouds. And so it has like not a long RT60, but it definitely like sounds like a big room. So it's super useful for stuff where you want air around things without it having like some giant room reverb that's distracting to what you're doing.
Yeah, it feels, as I recall, it felt a little bit like if your school had, if your elementary school had an assembly hall or something like that with a stage, right?
Yeah.
It's got that classic wooden stage feel.
Yeah, exactly. And then the downstairs is the control room, and then there's a main recording space, and then like a two small ISO room, or three small ISO rooms. One's totally dead. One's pretty dead, but with a rock wall in it, which changes the character of it. Mm-hmm. And then the other one's still pretty dead, and it's got a upright piano in it, but it has a giant diffuser in it. So they each have like slightly different tones to them, which is cool. But just like the church, the bathrooms are all wired in, and the lounge is wired in, so you can record kind of anywhere in the building if you want to.
Okay. Do we segue to a story about recording the weirdest thing you ever recorded in the bathroom yet, or do we save that for later?
I definitely remember doing a record with Tyler Ramsey. It was his one of his solo records, I think before he was part of Band of Horses. And I think he did several vocal takes like in the shower downstairs in the
nice. While the shower was running?
I know. I think they experimented with that, but it was too much noise.
Come on, Isotope can take shower noise out of a shower vocal, right?
But a lot of times the bathrooms get used for guitar amps. I use them for guitar amps a lot because the guitar amp will fill up the bathroom and you'll get those short reflections.
Yeah.
But it's not overwhelming because the guitar amp's so loud. So it does give it like a little bit of different feel. But I did do a record with Toubab Crew, which is kind of like a West African thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that album TK2, I did all of the kora happened in the tiled shower in the API room.
What's the kora? It's
the 20-string like chord harp.
Mm-hmm.
So he plays two things. He plays the kora and the ngoni, and the ngoni is like a smaller, I think it's only like 15 or 16 strings. Whereas the kora is like a giant gourd with like handles, and like I think they actually just use fishing line for the strings, which is interesting. A lot of those African instruments are kind of like, constructed from found things, which I think is awesome. That you can create a harp from like fishing line and a gourd. It's amazing.
Those guys are really cool. They were so you and I probably have crossed paths with some similar musicians and artists because I did the Bonnaroo Hay Bale studio for 15 years.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Backstage, which was started by Music Allies there in Asheville, Sean O'Connell, Zach Altheimer, and I would see Jessica Thomas in there at our Bonnaroo studio compound a lot. But one of the first bands that came through early on was this band called Toubab Crew, and they walked in and started playing, and I was just like, I just loved it. I was having so much fun. And, I'm a fan of world music and Afro pop and just, traditional African instruments. And these guys really like brought it all together in a nice way. So tell us more about working with those guys.
That was a cool session. We were in the studio for 5 weeks. I think we were taking weekends off so we could go play shows. But that was all tape. We were doing it all to like 15 inches a second tape on our 2-inch Studer machines. And so the first 2 weeks were basically, I just bought like a 14-inch reel of, I think I was using 911 at the time. And I would just turn the tape machine on and they would just jam. And they would jam for an hour until the tape ran out. And then we would listen back to the whole tape and they would make notes on stuff that was working and stuff that wasn't working. And we would just do that all day for 2 weeks.
Now, were you guys using extra large reels or something like that?
Yeah, the 14 instead of the 10.5, so that we could get like a full, I guess that's 5,000 feet or something.
Yeah, so a standard 15 IPS reel would be 30 minutes. A standard 30 IPS reel would be 15 minutes.
Right. So we were going at, we were double sizing and going at 15. So we had an hour to work with at a time. And I guess I was transferring them into the computer while we were listening back so that we could refer back to them later. Then I think they took like a few days break because they were playing a weekend of shows, and then we came back and they had kind of put together these are the things that we like, and so they developed those into songs, and then we recorded the songs, and then we had good tones going, but then we were kind of changing. I had a drum kit set up downstairs in the main room downstairs, and I had one on the stage upstairs, so that they could kind of just go depending on what kind of kit sound they wanted. Teal, the drummer, who I have actually grew up right across the street from and have known my entire life, we would just kind of like get together before we record the song and be like, all right, what do you think this needs? And he would make a choice between downstairs kit and upstairs kit, and then we'd go for it.
Now, just out of curiosity, do you have the sanctuary and what do you call the 3-story building? What's the name?
We call it the API building just because it's centered around an API 3288 console.
All right. So the API building and the sanctuary, are they actually also connected cable-wise? Can you patch right in if you need, or do you rely on more modern, Ethernet solutions for that?
They're tied into the same internet. We actually don't record across buildings yet. I'm kind of just waiting for that to be something that seems necessary. We put fiber in between the buildings, so I tried to future-proof that, so I had the option of just using fiber and having some sort of, because at the time when we built that building, there wasn't anything that was really fast enough to do that in real time, but there probably is now, especially on doing MADI stuff and whatnot. So there's really fast
quantum internet, dude. It's right around the corner. They're already doing it.
I know. So I feel like I have infrastructure in place that we can do that at some point, but we don't have that set up at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys are doing multiple rooms in the API building, and what else? Maybe I'll just pivot on a drum question for you. So what are some things that you have really enjoyed as far as ways to record drums? 3 of the records on your discography I pulled up were Cardinal Sun's Arrival, White Denim, Thank You, and Cardinal Sun's again, Casanova. Just some really cool drum sounds. Maybe talk about some of the different styles of drum sounds you get at Echo between the different studios.
So Cardinal Sun's is an interesting one because that was produced by Charlie Sexton. And he doesn't seem to operate with any specific set of rules for recording. So it was great for me because he comes in and I kind of have things set up in a way that I think is quote unquote right. And he's just starts going around and moving stuff around into odd spots, and the overheads aren't set up any way like you would expect them to be, because he's, doesn't care about the rules. So he's just let's try it like this, and
Nice.
He's just throwing shit on the floor toms and stuff that's just rattling around on there, and just totally no rules. And that, for me, that was great because I was oh, this guy's been doing this for 30 years. And if he doesn't have any rules, then I guess I shouldn't either, really, and that helped a lot. And cause I guess that was one of the first sessions where I was engineering for a, well-known producer type. as opposed to being the assistant. Like I was making mic decisions and tone decisions and then, talking to the producer about it. But this was like my first opportunity to really work as the engineer for a producer who'd done a bunch of, or at least at the very least played on huge records, obviously being the guitar player for Bob Dylan, and having like a giant solo career on his own right, it was very interesting working with that guy.
Did you ever try putting rice on the drums? Dry rice, not wet rice.
No,
rice.
I haven't tried that. I've definitely like using cheesecloth though.
Cheesecloth. Oh, I haven't tried that. So you just, instead of tea towels, you use cheesecloth across the drums?
Right, because the cheesecloth like is lighter, and so you get like a little burst of tone from the drum, and then it settles back on the drum and dampens it down.
Nice. Yeah, it's really fun treating drums when you get into all that stuff. Pieces of paper, just
pieces of paper.
11 pieces of paper can do a thing, but they shred pretty quickly.
They do shred. I think that's why I started. I haven't done the cheesecloth thing in a while, but I think I started doing that because I got tired of replacing the piece of paper because it was constantly getting shredded by the drumsticks.
Yeah. And now that I just said it the wrong way, I'm actually really excited to try wet rice on the drums.
Oh, yeah, right?
But dry rice is pretty cool. We did that on a record for the Fluid Ounces, Big Notebook for Easy Piano. There was a song called Killjoy, and Ross Rice who was the producer. I was in your shoes, first engineering, and he came in and poured dry rice all over the floor toms, and then we would just hit him, and it was like this crazy fun sound. So it's super fun. I'm with you. It's super fun to experiment with treating the instruments as best you can. Maybe don't pour rice all over the piano because it's a lot harder to get out afterwards.
Yeah, definitely.
The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring his PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It was like listening to three-dimensional sound with rock-solid bass all the way down to 20 hertz. It was really incredible. What's amazing is that a Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room or even bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound for mixing. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. Keep going on drums. What were some other cool ways that you've recorded the drums? What's the difference between drums in the room with the partial rock wall, the stage, the sanctuary? How would we envision those sounds as being different from each other?
So the rock wall room is real small, but it's just big enough to fit a drum kit. And that's my go-to room if I want like a 70s tight booth sound. Because the rock wall gives it enough life that it's not totally dead, but if you close the doors on that room, then it gets real dry in there, which for some things is like for like doing a lot of those children's hip hop records that I've done start with us recording a live band. And so we get all the sounds for the live band, and then Cactus who's has multiple pseudonyms, but his stage name is 23 Skidoo and his personal pseudonym is Cactus. So he takes all that stuff and would chop it up on an MPC and make beats out of it.
Nice. Is that how you start the children's death metal records too?
Right.
Just kidding. I was sorry. I got one more dumb pun for you. So that room is basically rock wall versus rock wool.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Good. I'm done. I'm done. Rockstars. Right. Thank you.
So that's good for like hip hop stuff. And actually those Mandolin Orange records, I did all of Joe Westerland's drums in the rock room too. Just so that everybody could, then that was function more over tone, just because they all wanted to be close to each other and down in the same room, but without a whole lot of bleed.
And is that like the White Denim sound? Is that
yep. White Denim was done in that room too. Yep.
Yeah. It's a great, it's a cool tone. And the kick on that particular one, I remember having a nice sort of soft quality to it, which I think can be real. Yeah. That's a challenge sometimes, is like allowing a kick drum to be pillowy, but still legible in a rock song where you don't sort of resort to just cranking up the EQ to bring out the beater, you know?
Yeah. Well, the other thing about using those small rooms is that, people they want to just put a million mics on a drum kit just to have options. Mm-hmm. But if you're in that tiny room, it's like there's no reason to use more than like 8 mics, like you're just close micing everything. So it's limiting in a way that really puts the onus of the drum tone onto the drummer and his drums, and really getting exactly like what the drummer's doing. And there's not a whole lot of trickery in that room because the room's like big enough for a drum kit.
Right.
So there's no room mics. There's no weird off to the side mics. There's none of that. It's basically just like a couple mics on the kick, couple on the snare, rack tom, and then 2 overheads. And that's like about all you got room for in there.
And so the overheads still feel kind of standard, or do you even position them differently?
Well, I used to do 3 overheads in there, but it ended up being kind of more than I needed. So I dropped back to like a standard. So basically I'm miking like the ride cymbal and the hi-hat with the overheads.
What would a 3 overhead look like?
The 3 overhead would just have like a nice tube mic directly over the center of the kit. That's sort of just getting, and I think that's how the white denim thing was. But Ethan and Dom had like, they were, they had like kind of the classic British approach where they were like not trying to touch the EQs and shit. They were like just in there shifting mics around by an inch at a time until they got exactly what they were looking for.
Nice.
Which was really cool to watch too. Also, that whole record he mixed live on the API desk. He didn't use automation or anything.
Oh,
he was
wow.
He was doing tape machine through desk back to another tape machine and just riding faders live. And so he would do like kind of 3 takes of a mix and choose the one that he liked the best. And
okay,
so old school.
Was the mixing happening while the band was performing, or
no? That was after the fact.
Okay,
I think they recorded for a couple weeks and then they mixed for a week. And I was in and out during the tracking session, but I was there for the whole time of the mixing.
It's so much fun to make records that way. I haven't done that in so many years, just because, the situation with computers, other than my Bonnaroo studio where we didn't even, the multi-track was, an aside. And so the actual mix was happening when the performance happened. And that's also cool because that's a whole unique sound. Do you ever get a chance to do records like that where, it's a live to 2-track kind of performance?
Well, I mean, I used to do a bunch of the, what is the name of that show? Now I'm blanking on it. We used to do a bunch of it was one of the first kind of like internet live shows.
Not the Echo Sessions.
No, not Echo Sessions. I do mix live to 2-track. I was getting there, but before we started doing Echo Sessions, we were doing and I can't believe I blanked. It's like Wolfgang's Vault.
Okay. All right.
But Ray, I'll remember. I'll remember it at some point. It'll come to me.
All right,
but it's a really popular thing where they kind of grab bands that are on tour and get them to come in and play 4 songs, and they do it in Rock Island.
Not like Tiny
Indiana.
Desk or something like that.
It's like way before Tiny Desk, but it's kind of the same thing. Only like it was happening in studios.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I've done some of that. I did that at Bonnaroo. I've done that in my own studio. And one of the things that really struck me was just the quality of the sound that you get when you just run mics through a console straight down to a 2 mix and then capture that. It's pretty unparalleled, and I wondered if you experienced any similar, response to it.
I do it once a month for the Echo Sessions, which is great. I mean, because they're being streamed live. But a lot of times we end up just using the live mixes for what goes on PBS too, because it's a budget thing. Like there's not the budget's not really there to go back and do remixes of everything. And they're like, hour and a half long shows and stuff. So it's like a whole day to remix it. But the other thing is that the live mixes just have they've got a vibe to them. I mean, because it's most of those happen in the church. And so it's like mics into a Neve console and into an API 2500 compressor. And then that's what you're hearing.
Yeah. It's a fun thing to do. What are some things that you've learned about the process of doing a live to 2-track session well?
You got to pay a lot of attention, but mostly to like dumb stuff, like pull the reverb down when they're talking in between songs so it doesn't sound ridiculous,
Yeah.
But it gets me back in that mindset that I was in when I was doing live sound, where you are sort of like, you have to really listen to the song so you can anticipate like okay, well, this is the second verse. Okay, now we're in the second chorus. There's probably going to be a guitar solo next. So get the finger over on the guitar knob, like, and just be ready for that to happen. And this background singer's stepping up to the mic. So turn the background mic back up, which you turn down because it has tons of drum bleed in it that you don't need in the mix. The rest of, just little things like that where you have to stay on your toes all the time.
Now,
not to mention that.
Do you usually have the musicians with headphones on, or are you trying to do it where they don't have headphones on?
We do it with headphones on because just the drums in the room with vocal mics is enough that like adding monitors is like, can be even just totally unwieldy. So we encourage them to we tell them if you've got in-ears, bring in-ears because it looks better. But we really want to do it in headphones because it's, I liken it to like, I don't know if did you ever watch the like Live from Abbey Road series that was it on VH1 or something for a while?
Maybe. Yeah.
And they had everybody in headphones. They were in a studio, and so people will come in and kind of be like, oh, I don't know if I really like the way the headphones look, or the camera guys sometimes gripe about the headphones, but I'm like, this is like a live in studio thing. We're in a studio. You wear headphones in a studio. Like it's not that big of a deal. We're doing one tomorrow, which actually probably won't have headphones because it's Amethyst Kaya and she's performing solo. So, when someone's just playing their guitar and singing, then we can dispense with all of that and they can just capture what they're in the room doing, which is nice to do sometimes. But, when it's a full band, I really don't want to introduce monitors into the situation too, because it just increases the amount of, trash in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even have monitors, but, my experience down at the Bonnaroo studio is very small, dead space. And we always had headphones on. But when we did stereo sessions at my studio, which was the name of our YouTube series, we even went a step further. And I just thought, why play the game where you're like, oh, how do we never see the cameraman in this? And I was like, screw it. Like, we're in a studio. People have headphones on. It's a party. So you can see people there. So I encouraged everybody to take their iPhone and just like get up right in the singer's face and get a shot while they're singing. And, go right up to the fingers on the guitar doing the solo. And so you actually see like the interns and the people who are at the party in the video. And it made it really fun. So maybe not for everybody, but it was fun for us.
When we've got an extra camera on those things, we set it up in the control room. And then the guy who's cutting the live video mix will cut to the control room occasionally, just, kind of like they do at the Oscars or whatever, where they give you the control room, just to kind of like remind you that like, you're watching there's a bunch of other people here making this production happen. It's, it's not just like you're magically in there, so I actually don't mind seeing camera guys.
Sure. Do you go in there and tell me like, listen, man, I got a fever and there's only one solution. I got to have more control room. Got to have more mixer.
I just try not to pick my nose while the camera's on me. That's the main goal.
We have one last thought about that. So I actually would park a iPhone on my console facing me, and I got one of those little fisheye lenses off eBay, and you just a little magnet, stick that right to it. And that was great. So I could just cut right to the fisheye lens, and then you could see the faders and me mixing and all that kind of stuff. It's just fun, man. Making videos from studios is super fun.
It is so fun.
Rockstars, I encourage you to do it for your own situation. Just cook something up and make them regularly and just have fun.
Yeah, and I would say that like, even if it seems kind of dumb and contrived at the time, man, when you go back and watch those things later, you're so glad that you have them. Because they do, you forget so much. We forget so much of like, and just having that little snippet of a video of you doing something, that's important to you, it takes you right back. And so like, I mean, I feel lucky that like I'm working on a show that's like goes on to TV and gets played on repeats. And like, if I feel like I can go watch that, and then immediately I'm mentally back in the chair in front of the desk, like mixing it. It's awesome. I love, because I have a feeble memory from whatever all this stuff I've done in my youth.
I think you're the first person to use the word feeble on the podcast. That's great.
And so any like assistance I can get is great. And then I'm terrible at like taking pictures of what I'm doing while I'm doing it. So I love it when someone else is doing that for me. I can look at those pictures or watch those videos later.
Totally. I'm a huge fan of using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice right now in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the new subscription options. For only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, tonal balance control, visual mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Envoy Pro Electron is the fastest, toughest, mini-sized, universal portable USB-C SSD that lets you record from anywhere in the galaxy with confidence. With speeds of up to more than a gigabyte per second real-world performance, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron gives you high-speed audio data for recording and playback. Take your sessions and sample libraries with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Never worry about the storage and safety of your work again. Find the new OWC Envoy Pro Electron and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Julian Dreyer, joining us from Echo Mountain Recording. Julian, you ready to jam, dude?
I'm ready.
All right. How do you set up to record a band like the Avett Brothers' Open-Ended Life, one of the records in your discography? What would be a typical setup that would work for a band like that? And maybe describe what their instrumentation is.
So a lot of the stuff that I've done with the Avett Brothers has been me in an assistant role. But I did do a stint over the course of 2014 where they were using Echo Mountain to write, which was totally fascinating. But it was just the three of them. It was just the core group. And I guess Seth was playing all the drums and stuff. And it was mostly just placeholder stuff when they got the actual band in there to do it. But a band like the Avett Brothers, or I would relate it back to like Mandolin Orange, it's the same way, that are so much of what they're doing has to do with the interaction of the brothers and the interaction of the core group and what they do live and what they came up doing live when it was just the three of them. That my first approach is to put them right on top of each other.
Don't most brothers just fight and wrestle in the living room floor?
I mean, I did with my brother, but I assume they have a history with that. But now they're running a business together, so they're a little bit more civilized. They're also the nicest people ever.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, as I recall with those guys, they are the kind of band that is likely to, the banjo player is like, oh no, I'm playing a kick drum at the same time, right?
Yeah, and they did the first one, Emotionalism, the first one that happened at Echo Mountain that I was assisting on. They kind of Danny set up some gobos, so they were right next to each other like they were playing on stage, like in a row, but they had gobos in between them. And then, I guess it was Scott that was playing the kick drum and the hi-hat. So he had that set up with them. So they're basically just doing their live show in front of mics.
Right.
I guess that record was done to a tape machine. So they were just set them up live. When we were doing the writing sessions, I just put Scott and Seth, I just had them face each other, sitting in chairs with like a mic for their instrument and a mic for their voice, and was just like, they just went for it. They just started playing these songs they were in the middle of writing, and then we would go back and layer on piano or drums or bass or whatever to it. But when Bob was there, he was right there too. So they're just standing in a tight little circle playing. And there's bleed and stuff, but like when you have musicians like that, I feel like you get the best stuff when you put them in a situation where you're like, yeah, we're not going to do any studio trickery. You're just going to play it good.
Yeah.
Just go in there and play it good. And I feel like the end result is so much better than sometimes it's good to not give musicians an out. Be like, yeah, you're in the studio and we're going to put these great mics in front of you, but ultimately you have to play it good, or we're not going to get it.
Now, you had them set up with gobos, and this was in the Sanctuary?
Yeah, that was for Emotionalism. And then when they came back to write, we were also in the Sanctuary, but it was much more of a like intimate, like the studio is kind of not non-existent then, in the sense that like it doesn't get in the way of, I really just didn't want to get in the way of the creative process. It's one thing if you come in and your songs are all worked out and ready to go, but if someone's actually trying to finish formulating the thing, then I want to be invisible. Like I'm just here, I'm recording all the time. It's never not recording. And if you get something, I've got it. And you just go out there and do your thing until you're ready to listen to something back. And then we'll find it and listen back to it,
Now, how big of a space would you describe this for people to be in that kind of line up like a stage? And how critical are gobos? Did you use the power of figure 8 mics, for example, to reject other instruments, or was that less of an issue, as you recall?
On Emotionalism, let's see, I guess it was about a 35 feet across their whole gobo situation. And so they each had kind of their own little box. And so they had a gobo with a window, like a tall gobo with a window on either side of them. And so one gobo was the left wall for someone and the right wall for someone else, because they were like, they're sort of sharing gobos to make walls. And then they had a half gobo in front of them. So their whole sound was projecting out into the room. And then there was room mics in there too. So there was like an element of it where you were hearing the combination of everything they were doing together. But the gobos were important to just make sure that the vocals could be treated separately and their individual instruments could be treated separately from each other.
Okay.
So it was important in that case to do what they were trying to do. When they were in there and it was just them writing, I guess part of it was that I didn't expect it to be the record, even though it could have been. And it's funny, I've done some remixes for their fan club from those sessions because they're great. But I had just done the first Mandolin Orange record, and so I was really hot on this idea of like, if you got people that are used to performing together, just get them together and let them perform, and don't worry about everything being so clean, because if they get it right, none of that's going to matter. And so I was just kind of like, yeah, you guys come in here, just sit across from each other, and like, don't worry about the mics, don't worry about any of that stuff. Just worry about like writing your songs and performing them. And I'll figure out all the other stuff later, or I'll be doing it while you're working on stuff, and I'll get everything, all the phases right and all that other stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So it's a totally different thing than if you're like doing like a Steep Canyon Rangers record is similar in the sense that they all want to be in the same room, but everyone's heavily goboed, because they all want to be able to cut their solos several times so they get exactly the solo they want. And because especially that music that's like very solo oriented, where there's a solo break in every song no matter what, and sometimes for multiple people. So that's when I'll really bring out the gobos and try and get people separated as much as possible, but still be in the same room.
Okay, here's a tough question for you. Ready?
Yeah.
What's a gobo and how do you make one?
Oh, right. So I don't really know how to make them because I'm not much of a making things person, but essentially it's a like a 2 or 3 foot wide wall on wheels that's foamed. There's foam all over the wall, so it absorbs as much as possible. And sometimes they're solid, 8 feet walls, and sometimes they're half of it's a window, so that you can create we like to create little what we call like little fish tanks for vocalists, where surrounded on all sides by these windowed gobos, and you look like you're in the, you can see the top half of the singer's body and inside what looks like a fish tank.
Are they heavy? So they probably maybe
so
have
heavy.
A very thick piece of wood in the middle that blocks sound from going through it.
There's some sort of really solid heavy thing in the middle because they weigh so much. It's definitely like a 2-person job just to kind of roll them around. I mean, you can do it by yourself, but it's not safe.
So Rockstars, the intention would be to prevent sound from going from one person's station through this gobo to the next. And then also the treatment that is facing you on the gobo is all about how that sound reflects back to you into your microphone, right?
Right. Yeah. And I use them a lot. I use the solid 8-foot ones without windows a lot. I'll put 3 of them behind the drum kit just as a way of like focusing the energy of the drums outward into the room towards my room mics and not losing it backwards,
right.
And also not allowing the whatever energy that's going backwards to reflect off of the wall behind and then create confusing phase correlation. It focuses the sound a little bit more.
Yeah,
so,
it's a good solution for that challenge of, if you put a drum kit in a totally big, wide open room, sometimes you can feel like the drums just get swallowed up by the space.
Yeah. Yep. And there's just no way to dry it up enough to do what you need to do in the mixing process. And so by having it kind of push all that energy out into the space, you have a little bit more of an option of like whether to use your room mics or not, because your close mics are drier.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's another way I use gobos a lot, is just to sometimes just putting them up randomly in the room just to create more sabines in the room.
More sabines. Tell us about the sabines.
Well, the sabine is the unit of measurement for sound absorption.
That's right.
Like the human body is a set number of sabines.
Oh, and you know that from your live
from live sound. That's right.
So
live sound always sounds better.
Yeah. What is maybe give us a brief primer on feedback and how that's different between sound check and the actual gig because of sabines in human bodies.
It's because of meat sacks is what we used to call them. Or blood, we call them blood sacks or meat baffles. Meat baffles was the best.
Meat baffles, I like that one.
And it's just I got into the habit of essentially like getting things where they kind of sounded all right, but not actually mixing front of house until the first song of the actual like making sure everything worked. But it sounds so different, especially in a room like the Orange Peel, which is a giant concrete box.
Mm-hmm.
That like I didn't really have any idea what was going to happen until there was actually people in there. So I would kind of like make sure everything worked, get a rough mix together, but not actually do a whole lot of like EQing or level balance until they're actually playing with all the meat baffles, because it changes the way that everything's reacting and the sound on stage gets so much better for them. So when I'm doing monitors, it's kind of like sometimes I would even like they would get their vocal up to a certain level, and between sound check and the show, I would actually turn their vocals down in their monitors.
Right.
So their first interaction with the monitors sets kind of the bar. Like their mind is going to tell them the vocals at the same level, right?
Right.
But now there's no slapback from the back wall. So it's going to sound a little bit better and clearer. And I've just bought myself a little bit more headroom before we get to the point where it starts feeding back. So if they do want it back up at the level it was at, then I've got room plus a little bit, because there's also cheering people now. There's extra noise in the room, but it was definitely like a little like kind of CYA thing where like, I'm like, all right, there's going to be people in here. So I'm just going to dial everything back a little bit. And then if they come out and it's not loud enough, I'll just go back up to where it was when they left, and it'll seem louder than it was.
Well, one of the lessons I learned the hard way doing live sound was, despite my brilliant engineering technique and ability to compress the lead vocal and make it sound cool in the mains, sending that compressed lead vocal to the monitors was not such a good idea because it was causing tons of feedback.
Yeah, you've just brought up the level of the noise enough where it can misbehaving.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So another artist you work with, Jim Lauderdale. Tell us a story about working with him. He's an amazing songwriter, super cool dude, inspiring musician.
And he's just so full of one-liners. He has one-liners for days. I mean, that guy, he's super nice, and he can seemingly write songs that are of the caliber of someone who slaves over them, like just sort of whenever he feels like it. The record that I did with him was all songs that are based in or around or about North Carolina.
Okay.
And so one of the concept that he had was that he wanted to get a sort of cross section of North Carolina, like string bands, to be on it. So we had different people coming in and out of the studio the whole time. And some of these songs I think he wrote on the spot, and it's really hard to tell when you listen to the album which ones are kind of like written on the spot and which ones are sort of, maybe more crafted or slaved over, because for him it seems totally effortless. But yeah, we were in the API building. So we had everybody kind of in their own room, except for Jim was in the main room with usually one other musician, just because we didn't have quite enough ISO booths for everyone to be by themselves. And he was the classic like band leader, just like doing takes and then like giving people notes and then doing another take and only doing probably 4 or 5 takes before he was kind of like, all right, that's what we need,
Nice.
And telling the same terrible one-liner joke every time someone new came in the room, so we all had to hear it like 5 times. Like this guy is hilarious.
That's funny.
That was a great experience, just because he's such an old pro.
Yeah.
And it was illuminating for me to, again, like once you get to a certain point in your career as a songwriter and a recording artist like that, like he just does not sweat the small stuff at all.
Yeah.
He's not worried about little details. He's like, he can tell by how I carried myself that I knew what I was doing. And that was the last time he asked me anything about engineering,
Yeah,
he was just
cool.
kind of like, all right, we're doing this and you clearly know what you're doing and do your thing. I'm going to, write some songs on the fly and get these musicians in order, So it was.
The time I met Jim Lauderdale, I was out at Joshua Tree State Park with a friend, and we had checked into a cabin. I think it was called the Rimrock Ranch. And we had a 4-track with us, and we were going to go write songs in this little rented cabin on the desert. And when we took a break to go outside, there was this dude who's dressed up in like flashy boots and a jacket and carrying a guitar around and just writing songs and walking through the tumbleweeds, just like kicking up dirt. And it was Jim. And he was just like, he had just checked himself into this place out in the desert to just go work on songwriting for a while. And I remember thinking like, that is really cool.
Wait, but he wasn't involved in what you were doing? It was
no.
Like
he
random?
He just happened to rent the cabin next to us. Yeah.
Oh my God. I want Jim Lauderdale to happen to rent the cabin next to me like all the time.
Yeah. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, this is how the real guys do it.
Yeah, he's real. He's for real.
Going out and just working on a song in the desert is work. Part that counts as work, going to work for the day. Very cool. Any other cool lessons you learned from working with him on that session?
I mean, that was the main thing, is that he just, he definitely like knew what things mattered for what he was doing and what things didn't, and very clearly so.
Yeah.
And so I just took that as a lesson of just like, keep reminding yourself not to get bogged down in details, because what you're trying to do is make something that creates an emotional response. And a lot of times that doesn't have anything to do with the technical aspects of what you're doing.
Yeah. One of the challenges for recording your voice is getting close enough to the microphone that you get a great bass boost proximity effect without getting blasts of wind on the microphone. Try this experiment. Hold your hand in front of your mouth and say, peanut butter popcorn. Feel that blast of air on your hand? That will cause a terrible sound on your microphone called a plosive. My favorite way to avoid this is to use the JZ microphone pop filter in front of the mic. This thing is built like a tank with a flexible metal arm that I can clamp directly onto the mic stand. It has a super cool waveguide design that looks like ripples on water and prevents the plosives getting through to the mic no matter how explosive the voice gets. Plus, it lets the high frequencies through for superb clarity on the mic. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. The STX-100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX-100. A fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers, the STX-100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, AdVision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX600 modules, combining the STX100 mic pre and C610 complementer in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Well, speaking of emotional responses, you quickly said a name, which we should circle back to, Steve Martin.
Right.
Yeah, you've recorded him. Isn't that the guy with the animal balloons on his head?
Right, that's right.
So tell us the story about working with Steve Martin on that record.
So I did
And was that with Brandon Bell?
Yes.
Because he shared a story about working at Echo Mountain.
Yes, one of them was with Brandon. Because I think Brandon actually, that was the album that had Paul McCartney on it.
Yeah, he told that story.
And Brandon was he was the engineer for Gary Pachosa.
Yeah.
And Gary was producing that record. So they ended up taking our Elam 251 to Long Island and recording Paul McCartney with it. Which is great because we got Paul to sign the mic. So our 251's got Paul McCartney's signature on the mic box.
Nice. Smart move.
Yeah. That was Steve's deal. He was like, you can take this mic,
but you have to get it
sign it.
Yeah. Cool. So how was it working with Steve Martin?
So working with Steve is cool. It takes a long time for him to kind of let you in and sort of trust you in the room with him, which totally makes sense to me because, Lord knows the sort of things he must have to deal with on a daily basis, just operating within society, being a celebrity and being one that's been around for so long and being a comedian where people expect you to be funny all the time. Mm-hmm. So he's really funny, but he's not trying to be funny in that situation. He's making music. He's super serious, And it took me 4 sessions before he cracked a joke at me, And when the first time he cracked a joke at me, I was like, oh, cool. All right. I'm in now. It's okay for me to, you're comfortable with me now,
right.
But it took 4 sort of week-long sessions on different records. So the first one that I worked on was the one with Gary, which I guess was So Familiar, I think.
Okay.
And then I also worked on the one he did with Edie Burkell, and that was when I first got to meet Peter Asher, which was kind of a big deal for me. I mean, Peter Asher. Mm-hmm. Peter Asher was kind of a big deal for me because he'd done these legendary James Taylor and Beatles records and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is a guy from a bygone era, and he's still out there doing it. And lots of lessons from him on what things matter and what things don't matter. I mean, he did not let himself get bogged down in the details. Everything was about the song for him entirely, and He also confirmed the weird story about James Taylor, like how they built a box for his body to be in and his head to be outside of to try and separate the acoustic guitar mic and the vocal mic, which I thought was total bullshit. And I asked him about it, and he was like, yeah, we did do that. It didn't work.
That's hilarious.
That's all hilarious. He had to say about it. He was like, yeah, we did that. It didn't work.
That's really
It sounded
funny.
terrible.
That's really funny. I've heard that done for piano, though. I've heard that done where, gosh, I can't remember who it was.
I put a little gobo up, like right where the I have a little piece of foam thing that fits perfectly right where where the thing that holds the music is on the piano, and you lean it against the top when it's open, and then that kind of creates a little barrier in between someone singing and the mics that are actually on the piano. It seems to work pretty good.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a go-to tactic for me in that situation.
Nice. Yeah, recording piano can be quite difficult. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or pivot back to it.
Yeah, I just don't overthink it. I mean, the piano, I've recorded it in like 10 different ways, and it sounds like a piano every time. It's like the Leslie speaker. I spent a day with a guy putting every single mic combination on a Leslie speaker possible, just like to see if there was any difference. They all sound the same except when you put an RCA 44 on it. Then it sounds cool.
Oh, really?
And different. Yeah. But it's the only thing that's in any way, like you could put a 57 or two C12s on, you put two 57s or two C12s on a Leslie cabinet. It sounds like a Leslie cabinet.
Yeah. Now with the RCA 44, are you talking about a pair of them or a single?
Yeah, a pair of them.
Okay. So I only need about 8,000 to 10,000.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's just,
but that's cool.
Pocket change.
There's pocket change. Yeah, cool, man.
But,
and
I think
another name you went by really quickly there was Edie Burkell, which is cool to hear her name, man. Her record with the New Bohemians, that's, that takes me back to the 80s, right?
Yeah. Well, or early 90s, I guess.
Shooting Rubber Bands at the Stars.
Yeah.
Great record.
Yeah, and I didn't actually meet her. She wasn't on those sessions because they had done all of her tracks already.
Okay.
But Steve was always there for all of that stuff.
That's cool, man.
And he had such a great kind of camaraderie with the Steep Canyon Rangers, and those guys are kind of they had already done a couple records with Gary, so that was a real comfortable session because everyone knew each other already. And then they, I think, had spent some time hanging out with Peter before they did that session too. So those were always really great sessions because everybody knew what they were supposed to do and what role they were playing, and would just come in and just knock things out, you know, and exactly what needed to happen would happen. And I made my job easy because I had recorded the band or been involved in recordings of the band enough times that when Jess was like, oh, the producer on this is Peter Asher, so you better be on your A game. I was kind of like, okay, cool. I've recorded this band 3 times. So it's nice that it's this band.
Yeah, you're like, I invented the A game.
Yeah, exactly. So,
the A stands for the A in Julian.
Right, exactly.
Shoot, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, did you try this dumb joke on Steve in reverse? Did you try the thing where like they do their performance and you're like, that sounds great, guys. Should we roll one? You didn't try that on record one,
right? Yeah. I actually have a funny Steve Martin story.
Tell it.
It's actually a G Love story. So
nice.
I was doing this album. I guess I was assisting on this one, and it's the album Fixin' to Die by G Love. Mm-hmm. And it's like a blues record that was produced by Seth and Scott Avett. And Steve got wind that the Avett Brothers were in the studio, and he's a big Avett Brothers fan. So he wanted to come up and meet them. I'm just going to call him Garrett from now on because This is a Garrett story, not a G Love story. This is not public persona. This is like Garrett from Philadelphia.
Okay.
And like he was like, oh my God, Steve Martin's coming to the studio. And he was so starstruck. It was hilarious. And he told us some other stories about him like getting overly starstruck with other people and being like a total dork, which it's great. I mean, like, it's a human thing to do, And so Steve comes up to the studio, and Garrett is like totally beside himself. And he gets Steve to sign his acoustic guitar, and he gets him to put on it to Garrett, "Don't be a jerk, Steve Martin."
Nice.
Which I thought was a hilariously dorky thing to get someone to put on your guitar, you know?
Yeah, that's such a good reference, too.
Which was one of the things that I loved about Garrett, too, is that it was like he has this, like, you know, cool guy persona. But, you know, when you're in the studio with him, he's a dude. He's a normal dude, just like the rest of us. This just happens to be his job.
He just happens to like funky cold beverages, you know, what can you say?
And milk and cereal, you know? So it's
yeah, right on, man. And I don't remember if The Jerk was that Steve's first
I think it was his first huge film.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I need to go back and watch that one. Tell us the story about Stephanie's ID. That's another band that's in your playlist, and it's quite different from these other ones that we're talking about with all the banjos and acoustic fiddles and things, I believe.
So first of all, it's pronounced Stephanie's id.
Oh, thank you.
It's a reference to her, you know, her id.
Okay, all right.
It's like that's where the music comes from or whatever. So that band is an Asheville-based band. Stephanie is actually in LA now because she has created an entirely like second new life for herself as a voiceover artist, which is cool. I mean, I think I follow her on Instagram, and I think she just posted some animated stuff with her voicing stuff. So like, and she gives voiceover classes to people. So she's created this whole post being in a rock band situation, which is, you know, I think it's cool when people reinvent themselves. That record was cool. We did the session. They recorded the basics somewhere else, and then we did a whole load of overdubs at Echo. And then Vic Stafford, who was the drummer on that record, also engineered it. And he's a great engineer. He
mixes the drums real loud.
Yeah. Well, you know, drummer, you know.
That's where it's at.
But that was a cool session because it was because we were all friends. You know, I mean, it was one of those nice situations where like we had all kind of gotten to know each other outside of the studio, and then we were all in the studio together, kind of making this awesome creative thing happen, and overdubbing our sort of favorite Asheville musicians. And then I think Vic went and I think he mixed that whole record in like 48 hours because they had some kind of self-imposed deadline that they were trying to meet, nice. Which always impresses me when I listen to it. I'm like, oh my God, how did you do this with like in 2 days without taking any breaks? And like, you know, like
very quietly.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's talk about mixing more. So, you know, what are some of your favorite ways to mix? What are some of your favorite ways to mix at Echo Mountain?
In the church, there's a smaller sort of like production overdub room that I use as a mixing room also. Mm-hmm. And I love mixing through consoles. I still do it when I'm afforded the opportunity. Usually that's budget or passion related on the artist's account. Mm-hmm. But if in a normal situation, I've become very dependent on mixing mostly inside the box. And what I mean by that is mixing inside the box, but running it through a analog summing box. So I get like a little bit of the of not number crunching and just op amp summing.
Best of both worlds. What do you like to use for your summing?
I use a Dangerous 2 bus. It's clean if you want it to be. If you want it to be a little dirty, then you can hit those +6 buttons and hit the transformers a little harder. Nice. And back off the master fader. But it just has so much headroom that I just think that it does a lot of, it makes the stereo image a little clearer, and I think it makes the bottom end a little bit more cohesive.
Yeah, I've heard summing boxes described as extending the low octave in a mix. I think I saw SSL do a demo once where it was like it was done in the box and then it was done through an SSL AWS or something like that.
Yeah. again, it's just like printing your mixes to a tape machine. It's like, it's hard to really describe what the difference is, but it does feel a little bit more natural, you know? So that's my setup. So I'm using a lot of plugins. I have some outboard gear in that mixer room, but I generally just lean on some of the modeling plugins. So like I use a lot of the Waves modeling stuff, and I have, because of pandemic, I've had to set up a mix room in my house, which is where I am right now.
Yeah.
And so that's all based on an Apollo, a UA Apollo, which is what I had for kind of my like little mobile rig to record things on location if I needed to. And I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I kind of love working from my house too, but like,
don't say that.
I know, right? But for mixing, I think if I had my druthers, I would have a summer at home too, you know, because I do think it makes a difference.
Yeah.
But in having to pivot during the pandemic, when for like months at a time the studio wasn't even open, and then just trying to create a lifestyle in the middle of a pandemic where you don't go to a place with other people if you don't have to, then I've been learning the UA plugins and everything I've learned about them I like so far. So I'm sort of like mixing the plugin set at the studio that I'm used to using with like, you know, Waves and Sound Toys and the, you know, DigiDesign plugins and some Isotope stuff, and like, and then sort of learning new plugins at home. And the ones that pass muster, my plan is to just integrate them into what the set that the studio carries too. Because I've vetted them at home doing all in the box mixes so that it's got to be good if I'm back in a hybrid system.
Yeah. What about monitors? What do you do for your speaker setup so that you can make good decisions in your home studio?
I used to use, when I started, I was using these Avett PS6s that I bought in 2001 for my first home studio while I was still in college. And it became obvious that I was like, I needed some sort of a speaker upgrade. So what I actually ended up going with were the Kali In8s, which are like a 3-way monitor where the tweeter is concentric with the mid-range. And they're pretty inexpensive, and I'm super impressed with them. I talked to my Vintage King sales rep for a little while about it, and he was kind of like, yeah, he's like, our LA guys are like loving these things. They're over the moon with them. So I was like, okay, well, worst case scenario, I'll just send them back, you know, if I don't like them.
Yeah.
But one of the great things that they have is there's all these dip switches on the back of them, and it's sort of like these optimized corrective EQs depending on like what your room situation is. Yeah. So there's one for like, are your monitors on stands, but are they close to the wall? Are they on stands but away from the wall? Are they on a meter bridge? Are they just sitting on a desk? You know, like there's like 8 different scenarios that they have, and a dip switch combination that matches those.
It reminds me of like the early SansAmp pedals. Did you ever use those? You know, they get the little, you have to use the dip switches to change all your
totally
tones.
But I thought it was so smart, because if you're going to make, you know, a 3-way set of like active studio monitors and sell them for $800 a pair, you're definitely selling to people who are mixing in their bedroom, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so it just seemed really smart to take that extra step of trying to figure out how to optimize them for these variety of situations. So someone could just buy it and be like, oh yeah, it's on my desk in the corner. I'll just push these dip switches and then it's closer.
And so what are they called again?
Kali, Kali is the name of the brand. K-A-L-I. And then they have a couple different lines, but I went with the IN8. So they're like, they have 2 different lines. One of them are LPs and one of them are INs, and they stand for Lone Pine or Independence, which are like towns in California. Mm-hmm. But the 8-inch ones in the Independence series are 3 ways, and they I like the idea of a tweeter that's concentric with a mid-range speaker because of phase stuff.
Yeah, totally. And good close speakers for, near field monitors. I'm looking at them online now, and it looks like they're about $400 each, which is just what you were saying. Rockstars, I am super excited to announce that I'm doing a full studio remodeling here at the Toy Box Studio, headquarters of Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm working with the amazing studio designer Carl Tatz to upgrade my control room to a Phantom Focus mix room, and have also been improving the sound of my entire studio room by room. The first time I heard one of Carl's Phantom Focus mix rooms featuring the PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It felt like I was listening to three-dimensional sound where I could close my eyes and reach out and touch the instruments with crystal clear bass radiating from a 50-foot wall of pure marble. It was by far the best sounding mix room monitors I have ever heard anywhere. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. All right, let's see here. So you set those up. Did you have to make any tough decisions about where exactly to sit the speakers? Did you put them on stands? Did you set them on your desk or something?
I had stands already that had good isolation from the floor and stuff. So I just reused the stands that I had already.
Okay.
But I do have kind of like a funny little I found like an old foam mattress that we had been using for something in the house and had just stuffed in the basement. Uh-huh. We're doing this big basement clean out because my wife is repurposing a section of our basement to like really build in a ceramic studio exactly how she wants it.
Cool.
And so that was the room that had all the junk in it. So we had to do a purge. And in the midst of the purge, I found this giant foam mattress thing, like this memory foam mattress. And so I rolled it up into like a cylinder and put it behind my desk right on the corner between the floor and the wall. Because one of the things that I learned when I was trying to treat rooms at the studio was that you can knock out a lot of the bass standing waves if you put something foamy and, it's a Helmholtz resonator. Put it in the corner, it's foamy, it's varying depth, so it will eliminate standing waves of various levels of frequencies. So I jam that down in the corner where the wall meets the floor. And then the other thing that I've learned in the past is that if you have reflective space in between your speakers, it smears your stereo image like very noticeably.
Yeah.
And
what does that mean by reflective space?
For instance, I have a desk and then I have the speakers that are on stands behind the desk. Mm-hmm. But then there's just a sheetrock wall behind the speakers. So that little space in between the speakers, that little space in the wall in between the speakers, it's such a noticeable difference if you just put a piece of foam right on that spot. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of look around and think about like, okay, what are the other reflective surfaces that if I had a mirror? If I had a mirror, could I see the tweeters? And then put something absorptive right there.
Yeah, if you had a Coke mirror in the studio, which you don't.
Right,
you don't.
Right, exactly. Not in my house.
Sorry. So I love talking about this, and we've mentioned it many times on the show too. Just such a great reminder. Just you put that mirror on the wall, right? And then wherever you see the speaker is where you need to put up a
piece
panel.
Of foam there. You don't have to go crazy with like giant, panels of foam everywhere. You really just want them where it's actually reflecting to your head. And the speakers aren't moving. And as long as your head's not moving around that much, that spot on the wall is going to be a pretty small area. So I made a couple of those little mitigations and then used the tools that the speakers themselves had on them. And I'm pleasantly surprised with like how my mixes translate into the car or into my home stereo system and the living room or back in the monitor system at the studio. So yeah, it felt like a good sort of makeshift pivot that now I'm kind of like, do I just turn the guest bedroom into a mixing room now? Is that
right?
Is that what's happening to me now? But
well, I mean, that does. One of the questions I wrote down was just, where do you see recording going in the future? You're somebody who's got experience in a beautiful world-class multi-room facility, and you're also experiencing the home studio thing. If you want to share any thoughts about how you see, where music is headed or where recording is headed, please do.
I think it's headed. There's a band that I produced a record for, and I worked on the last one that they released. And the name of the band is the Get Right Band. And I think what they're doing is where it's headed, where essentially they're booking dates at Echo Mountain to record the drum kit.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're a 3-piece, then they're taking those tracks and they're in their bedrooms at home recording their bass parts, and they're good. And then the lead singer also plays guitar, can like labor over his vocals and his guitar solos and his guitar parts as long as he wants at whatever time of the day he wants. And it seems like people are getting much more creative that way, which I think is great, because there is like the double-edged sword of the studio is like nice mics, great room, everything sounds great, you're on the clock.
Right.
And so it's like the clock is very detrimental to creativity, or at least your awareness of the clock is very detrimental to creativity. So there's some bands that just write all their stuff and they've got it together, and those bands should come into the studio and do everything at the studio. But the bands that are like the recording process for them is also a creative, like exploratory process, then the studio is an excellent tool for getting really great tones as a foundation to build off of. But it's hard for me to try and convince someone that they should, come in and explore guitar parts at $100 an hour when they're not being able to play shows right now, and they're not making any money off of publishing because of Spotify and all the other, just sort of music business structural mess that makes it impossible for content creators to make money off of their content.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hard for me to recommend. If it was me, I would be getting like the sounds in a major studio that really needed a nice room to be in, and I would be doing everything else at home myself.
Yeah, well, I think it's more than just the concept of a clock too. It's also just, as humans, we only have so much energy in the moment.
Right.
And sometimes we need to just keep repeating the moment, in the morning, in the evening, tomorrow morning, tomorrow evening, whatever, and that can be hard to do when you're.
I don't know what it's like
in the studio.
I don't know what it's like in Nashville, but one of the things that Jessica and I decided on real early on at Echo Mountain was that it was worth it to us to offer an 8-hour time block instead of just a 12-hour time block.
Interesting.
So at Echo Mountain, you have the option of 8 hours or 12 hours. And, the old school guys laugh at that and like, well, if you're not working 12 hours, you're not getting anything done. And I've heard those kind of comments before, but I think those come from a place of like, maybe these people have never worked an 8-hour day to see what that's like.
Yeah.
Because as soon as we offered it, it became 90% of our business were in 8-hour blocks. People don't want to work 12 hours.
Now, did you split up the days into multiple 8 hours, or just give people that opportunity?
No, we just gave people that opportunity to work a shorter day.
Yeah, that's what I pivoted towards, but it wasn't because of the studio. It was because of me. I was just like, I just don't want to work more than 8 hours.
Yeah. I get it. I did a record with John Congleton, and like I guess it was Angel Olsen. It was an Angel Olsen album, and she booked 8-hour days. John had no idea they were 8-hour days, but he was quitting after 8 hours every day anyways. And he's like, on the third day, he was like, how long can we be here? Because he was trying to get something else extra done. And I was like, well, they're 8-hour days, according to what Angel booked. And he was like, oh, I didn't know that. I just don't want to work more than 8 hours.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you're not alone. Everybody books the 8-hour day, because it's so, I can't imagine being a musician and being able to maintain the ability to perform at the highest level for that long, or even that long.
Well, traditionally, Nashville divides a day into 3 sessions. It was like, morning, afternoon, and evening. And each one is 4 hours,
right.
but it's really just 3 even, because it was like, they come in and record 5 songs from start to finish in 3 hours.
Maybe the 12-hour day is an LA thing then. I don't know where.
No. I mean, the rock world was like, there was 12 hours was not long enough. And
right.
For a lot of the records I made with rock bands, where you just wake up in the morning, going to the studio, you're lucky if you took 2 hours off at dinner, they'd be like, what took you so long?
Right.
And then you just go until nobody can keep their eyes open anymore at 2 or 3 in the morning. But that's hard to sustain,
Yeah, it is. And I feel it so much more now being in my 40s, that when I am working a succession of 12-hour days, by the third one, I'm just like, man, like the rest of my life is falling apart. I don't have like any time to go to the grocery store. I don't have, you know what I mean? Like it's one thing for a band that's from out of town, who the only thing they have to do is go to the studio and make a record.
Yeah.
But the support staff on 12-hour days just gets like haggard real quick.
Yeah. So I felt like I wanted to take my notes from the film industry, because I would look at it, I was like, wow, how come, we spend a year making the record, but then they spend twice as much on the budget and they make a video in like a weekend or something like that.
Right.
And I would look at it and I was like, oh, it's because they just hire a lot of people, and like there's a whole staff that helps get things done. Yeah. And, and for me in the studio, I just started saying, what would happen if I just said it was an 8-hour day, but when you're here for 8 hours, man, you won't believe how focused we are. We are on it,
Yeah, that's the thing.
Not phoning it in.
When we do an 8-hour day, we get 8 hours of work done.
Yeah.
And I feel like the 12-hour days, we get 9 hours of work done.
Right.
So it's kind of like, all right, you pay an extra $250 a day and for an extra hour of actual work. And I would say that's a kind of a good pivot to like one of the things that I think makes Echo Mountain sort of special and makes the people that like to work there really like to work there is the 8-hour day thing was like it's a part of it, but it's like part of this like more global thing that Jess and I have both tried to do, where we've tried really hard to create a culture within that studio that's specific, like we're trying really hard to make that place a relaxed, comfortable, productive, ego-free zone,
Yeah.
And all of our assistants from the past, and then the ones that we have now that are also engineers, and we all work really hard to make sure to cultivate that mindset in them of like, we're here to facilitate. We're here to make sometimes it's just facilitating. Sometimes it's making someone's dream come true. Sometimes it's like just, being a helpful hand to a group of people that know exactly what they're doing. But always making sure that the environment is like relaxed and welcoming. And that there's not like you're not here to make your name be known. Right. You're here to help whoever's in there get whatever they need to get done. Jess says a lot of times like that the mantra at Echo Mountain is like, everyone that works here is a whatever it takes worker.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means for me is that like whatever my role needs to be on the making of a record is, I'm happy to do it. And sometimes that's on some records that means there's been some records when I'm down in the lounge watching basketball because they don't need me up there for anything. And then I go get them lunch, so I mean, like, I'm basically a runner, which is fine. That's what they need. Sometimes I'm the assistant, and so I'm sitting in the back of the room making patches, but not giving any opinions and just keeping my mouth shut. That's what they need. Sometimes I'm engineering and they want technical input, but no creative input. And sometimes I'm producing and I'm like telling them, you should switch to the ride on the verse here instead of the hat, and like little minuscule kind of like tweaks. But for us, it's kind of like when you remove your like personal ego from the situation, then it doesn't matter what job you're doing because you're on a team.
Yeah.
And the point is to get what the team needs to get done. And, we're not trying to impress each other or prove something to each other. We're just trying to all find a way to get what has to be done. And I think that people really respond to that. And I think, especially in our situation where you're like, we have like this multi-million-dollar studio in what is a very tiny market if you just look at Asheville. So we have to like be able to pull people in from other major markets. And so one of the things that we offer is an experience that's outside of the stereotypical music industry experience of a studio. Like you come out here, you're in this kind of cool, funky little town, but technically you're not sacrificing anything. It's an amazing studio, but everybody that works there is just kind of like, hey man, how'd you sleep last night? Like not like worried about I guess Gladys Knight's doing something in the studio tonight, but like she could walk in and I would just be like, hi, I'm Julian and welcome to the studio. And like, what can I do for you? Or it could be like like a local band, like I was saying, like the Get Right band or the Yo Mama's Big Fat Booty band, who's been from Asheville and toured all over the country. And they're friends with George Clinton and like have all these, but they're a band that's coming in to do a thing. And we're like, all right, let's make this thing happen and let's have fun doing it. Also, I'm a strong believer that if you're not having fun making music, like you can hear it.
Yeah, I agree.
You can hear it in the final, So for me,
or vice versa, you hear the fun in music, and that's what makes you hear it, excited about it.
And I think it's really important. I take the part of my job that is responsible for making sure everyone's having a good time very seriously.
Want to know how to record killer drums in your studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from Nashville session drummers in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro mix that won't take years to learn, Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of a great mix, then register for my free course, Mixmaster Bundle, to get great mixes using simple, free plugins. Get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR to get 10% off any course in the Academy for a limited time. How do you, so pertaining to figuring out what your role is on a session, how do you like to find out right away what the goal of the band or the artist is to help get to those needs? Do you have a way of doing that works pretty well?
I mean, I like to have like a sort of a quick informal conversation about like what sonic aesthetic they're going for. That way I just don't like waste time going down a road and then everyone comes into the control room and is like, we hate this, this sounds like Zeppelin and it was supposed to sound like, the
blimp.
Right.
The mothership. Sorry.
So I like to do that, but a lot of it for me is like in the first few hours of a session, I'm doing personality assessments. Like who's the alpha, who in this band is fucking each other? Right. Like who has opinions but is afraid to say them, or who just doesn't really care what happens. They're just there to do their thing and they're not invested in the creative decisions. They're just playing their part. Because I feel like if I can get a pretty good like sort of psychological assessment of the different personalities involved, then I can get to, ultimately you got to figure out who the decision maker is. And then I can have a conversation with that person or those people as to like what are we really trying to do here?
Yeah.
And,
well, I noticed you conspicuously didn't begin with going right up to them and saying like, what's your goal for the session, which could be helpful in some situations, but maybe you don't get the right answer until you say all those things you just said, whereas you really begin to understand what the true dynamic is under the surface here.
I mean, I want to know like how many songs are you trying to cut in how many days, that stuff I kind of do on the phone beforehand. Once everybody's in the room, then I'll have a quick kind of like check in about like, how big do we want the drums to be? What kind of guitar amps do you want to use? What is our general vibe going to be? And then once I've figured out who's the one who's really going to be the one making the decisions, or what combination of people are going to do that, then I'll start digging in to the other thing. And I can't stress it enough. The first like half of the day, I'm just trying to make them laugh and be funny.
Right.
Just so that they're like, so they feel okay about what they're about to do, which is like, strip naked in front of me.
Yeah, that's what you need everybody to do. You do need that, because you want that honesty in the music and in the creation. Dude, this has been really cool to chat with you on the podcast. We are approaching the end here, but I have a hypothetical question I want to ask you before we go. And I like to ask this of all our guests. I'm going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you get to go back in time, rewind 15 years or more, and go find young Julian and just say, listen, dude, here's this. I'm going to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
I think that what I would tell myself is there's never a time when you're in the studio when you don't have an opportunity to learn something new. So don't get lazy. Avoid ruts in the way that you work. And if you're in there doing what may be perceived as a less important role, what that means is that you have plenty of time to observe the people that are doing the quote unquote more important things. Because everybody that comes in there's got a bag of tricks. And if you can steal some of their tricks out of their bag, then your bag of tricks becomes more refined,
That's actually a quote I just heard from Chick Corea on a documentary. Yeah. Of course, we just lost him.
Because I'm sure it applies to musicians too.
Well, he said he would do sessions, and the young musicians would all look at him like, they couldn't believe they were on a session with him and they were learning so much from him. And then he was like, I mean, I'm stealing all your licks too.
That's right. Yeah.
I thought that was cool. Well, dude, thanks so much for hanging with us. Again, thank you to Jessica Thomason for connecting us. And let the rock stars know where should they go check out more about you and Echo Mountain and your studio. You have your own website as well.
I've got my own website. It's juliandreyer.com, and then echomountainrecording.net is where you can find out about Echo Mountain. And there's a video tour of the studio and a gear list if you like to nerd out about that stuff. And we give studio tours all the time. So if you're passing through, give us a call, and we're happy to show you around the place. So.
Yeah, it's a super cool spot. And then, Asheville itself, what an amazing city to visit. Incredible food, beer. Last time I was through there, we stopped at a vegan restaurant, and I couldn't believe, I had chips and salsa.
Which one was it?
It was on this road that feels like kind of like a little bit of a cobblestone fake road almost.
Oh yeah.
And it was I don't know, it's not a very good explanation, but it was
I know exactly what street.
It tasted like cheese dip, but it was made out of cashews or something like that. It was incredible.
Yeah, I think that was probably Rosetta's.
Maybe
Rosetta's is our like flagship kind of vegan restaurant in town.
Yeah, of course, all the dining rooms were closed when we went through, but dude, great hanging with you. Thanks so much. I look forward to being back there and look forward to saying hi to you in the studio. Yeah, I think we might have met before when I was there.
I met at your house after after the golf tournament one year.
That's right. That's right.
I was wearing a seersucker suit. Hard
that's
to,
right.
Hard to
That's
miss.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Our theme that year was Kentucky Derby. So
awesome, man. Well, I'm looking forward to reopening the studio here and having a big fat party when I do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. Groovy, man. Thanks so much.
If that does happen, let us know. Jess and I might just make the drive, even if we're not out there already.
All right. Groovy. Awesome. All right, man. Great to talk to you. We'll see you again soon.
Okay.
Cheers. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free trial subscription to get access to all their plugins. Or use the coupon ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off the pop filter for a limited time. And don't forget to learn how to get your monitoring just right at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. And finally, use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. We'll include all these links in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.